Good morning. My name is Yinka. I'll be speaking today about building systems that scale with regulation. Yes, I'm the guy that was speaking about the riveting topic of compliance. I'll show you some design patterns that turn compliance requirements from a weakness to a strength and that actually turn it to a competitive advantage. So here's our journey today. I'll share a little bit about my background. I'll walk you through what I call the compliance challenge and why it's so complex. Then I'll show you two simple design patterns that I've used. I guess you call them battle tested. I've used them in the past, and they've worked really well for me. Next, I'll discuss how you can decide when to use each pattern, a small sort of decision matrix that has worked for me and could work for you. Then I'll wrap up with some key takeaways and next steps. So a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer. I enjoy building products that help people get things done. I'm a product engineer at heart. It's what I've done for basically all my career. I'm currently a lead engineer at Personio, where we're building Europe's leading HR platform. We support more than 15K SMEs across Europe, and we operate from about 8 different countries. Before this, I was also a lead engineer at Goldman Sachs, a bank. So I've basically spent years and years dealing with regulatory complexity across very highly regulated spaces. In my spare time, I do enjoy traveling. Recently went on a safari in Kenya. It was amazing. That's one of the shots there. I'm very proud of it. And I do enjoy playing guitar. I played my first gig last year, which was really good. So the past couple of years have been really big years for me with public speaking and getting out there. Today, I want to share what I've learned about different approaches to building systems that scale with various compliance requirements. So let me tell you a story that might sound familiar to you. You and your team, you spend months and months building a critical service that works. It works great in production. You spend maybe 6 months building it. Then you have a legal and compliance review. Guess what? You don't meet the audit requirements. Now you're spending another, 3, 6, 7 months rebuilding, replatforming, rewriting, basically trying to get your services to work for something that they weren't designed to do. Your team is frustrated. Your leadership is asking you questions. You're not happy. No one is happy. That's not where you want to be. Unfortunately, like many of you, I've been there many times in my career. And it has taught me a really solid lesson, which is that compliance is not something you should introduce at the end. It's not something you should validate. It's not something that's kind of the last step in your product development cycle. It's something that should shape your architecture from day one. So let's talk about why designing systems that scale with compliance is so complex, and it's not something everyone just does intuitively. Well, to start with, compliance varies very differently across multiple dimensions. It's not straightforward. For example, it could vary by jurisdiction, right? GDPR could say delete everything for an entity in Europe, while financial regulations could say keep everything if, for example, you're an entity in the US. So you could have the same company operating across multiple jurisdictions, and you have the same user data, but then different regulations are telling you to do very different things, in fact, opposite things. It could also vary depending on the industry. For example, in banking, where I used to work, KYC checks could vary from a few weeks of due diligence to months and months of long institutional due diligence. It could also vary depending on the business context, right? Startups could have very different requirements, and they do have very different requirements to large enterprises. So a 10-person company wouldn't have the same regulatory constraints as like a 50,000-person company, for example. But even with all this complexity, we have to prioritize getting it right. The cost of getting it wrong is just so high. For example, you could incur massive fines that affect your bottom line. You could have your licenses revoked. Let's say your company has a banking license. If you fail an audit, you could be on the path to having your license revoked. There could be slow innovation due to repaying compliance debt. I've actually seen cases where my team weren't able to deliver value to customers because we were stuck repaying debt for many months, which is definitely not where you want to be. It's bad for team morale. It's bad for your own sanity, trust me. And then even in some industries like healthcare and pharma, compliance isn't just about fines. You're literally affecting people's lives. You're touching lives. So we have to be extra careful. The stakes are very, very high. So we've talked about how, all this is complex. It's not simple. It can vary depending on multiple dimensions. But here's what I've also learned, right? All this complexity, they shouldn't be obstacles. Actually, you can turn them to an advantage. You can turn them to something that forces you to create systems that are really scalable. A solid foundation enables progress. This is something that I actually heard in one of the talks yesterday, where some people from highly regulated systems were talking about how a solid compliance foundation can enable you build much quicker and with confidence. So you won't be terrified about where the next audit is coming from. You won't be wondering, is a huge fine just around the corner? But you can move and build more solidly. At Personio, actually, I'll share some business impact. Implementing one of the patterns that I'll share today helps reduce our international expansion timeline from, like a multi-month process to just weeks, and we're still cutting down on that time every time. So I'll show you how. Let's go straight into two patterns that I've used extensively and that I've seen work really well. The first pattern is state machines. Now, these are great for multi-step workflows where each stage has very clear, different compliance requirements. So a great example here could be user onboarding, where you have your user kind of going through multiple journeys, and the requirements across each journey are very well defined and very clear. So how it works is that you model your entities. Your entities could be your user, could be your client, if you're doing like a corporate client onboarding. You model them across different states, and then different events or system triggers will cause state transitions. And then you can have each compliance requirement as a state transition guard, basically something that prevents them from moving forward when they shouldn't, right? You're basically having automatic security guards in quotes. And these guards can be really, really complex, and they can be quite sophisticated or even entity or region dependent. So, for example, you can have corporate client onboarding. Let's say you're onboarding a corporate client, and your client needs to go from, let's say, pending to verified states when you verified that their KYC documents are complete and correct. Then they need to go from a verified state to an assessed state when you've determined their risk level. So some entities or some clients or some users might need like enhanced due diligence if they're in very like high risk jurisdictions, or if they're in high risk businesses where you actually have regulation enforces that you do some additional checks. Then you want them to go from assessed to either fully onboarded or offboarded, depending on if you need to do if you need to have some additional like compliance approvals. So this is a case where you could have like a manual step. Maybe your operations team or your compliance teams want to give a final sign-off to say, yep, we're happy with this customer. We're happy with having this person as a customer. You can also have that. So what you can now do is for each transition, you can introduce guards, right? So you can have a verify ID guard to check the KYC documents. It should check that they're complete, it should check that they're accurate, it should check that there are no issues with them and they're up to date. You could have an assess risk guard, which would run sanction screening. Basically, it would do all the additional checks that you needed to do and verify that like this customer is all good. And then you could have the approved or denied guard, which would check that we've gotten or that you've gotten the right sign-offs from your compliance team. In financial services, KYC validation can be a very, long, gruesome process, right? Like I've gone through this myself. You can hit really like gnarly cases where, you have multiple like risk levels. Like you have maybe a politically exposed person is getting onboarded. You have maybe a very high net worth individual, or you have someone in a very high risk country, and this can be a really long and like gruesome process. But I've seen like this particular pattern state machines really, really work there because it just makes things really transparent. It makes things really clear, not just to you as a technical team, but also to your stakeholders. So you can have, you can show this to like your operations team or non-technical stakeholders as well, and they can see where people are in the process. You can implement this pattern using tools like Munda, Spring State Machine, or even Temporal. You can use any other workflow engines that you know for this as well.
Hope you're enjoying this video. But did you know LeadDev has lots more to offer?
So webinar, podcasts, I even like articles, conferences, events, and most importantly, community.
And even thinking about like process, tech, and people, which is how LeadDev website is laid out, I really think this is the #1 learning platform for me as an engineering manager.
Don't forget to check out leaddev.com.
So yeah, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of using state machines as a compliance design pattern. Some of the key advantages are, like I've mentioned, you can have clear visibility into where your entities are in your system. Instead of searching through logs, what has happened with this person or what has happened with this entity, you can see it very, very clearly as they transition to different states. You can have state change events act as audit trails. Now, this is a personal favorite of mine. Basically, you're getting audit trails for free, which is wonderful, because as your clients are doing things and as they're moving from one state to the other, you basically have these events as automatic audit trails. Then it's also really, really easy to add new compliance steps without breaking your existing flow, which is nice, right? So you can evolve your system as you grow, as your business grows, and you don't have to keep rewriting or breaking things. One thing to watch out for here is make sure you don't embed complex business logic in your state machines. Keeping it kind of pure keeps your audit logs clean. It also just makes your state machine simpler to operate. A second pattern I'll talk about is compliance libraries. Now, a problem that I've seen repeatedly, you would think it's not very common, but it actually is having the same compliance logic scattered across multiple services. So for example, if you're in the business of running payroll, you can have salary calculation in multiple different systems. So you can have it in your payroll service, for example. If you are generating pay slips, you can have it in reporting service. If you are generating reports for your users, and you can also have it in like external API services if people are like querying your APIs to get data. Now, what I've seen happen is you have like 200, 300 lines of code in one place. Then you have the same thing slightly implemented differently in some other service. And annoyingly, you have it in a third service implemented also slightly differently, but then with like some bugs that no one really understands. This is terrible. It's highly inefficient. It leads to discrepancies. It leads to really difficult to evolve code. And you don't want to be doing this. So what should you do instead? You can extract compliance logic into shared libraries. Now, it sounds really simple, but it's very, very powerful. You can have the services import and call compliance functions, and then your library itself can handle all the compliance-specific rules. So if you have entity-specific rules, region-specific rules, you can have them embedded in the libraries. And as your organization evolves, you can keep evolving the library, and you can have a really clear versions of your compliance logic, which is also great for auditability. It's also great for evolving your systems. So a good example here is if you have like a salary calculation library, like I mentioned. Now, instead of having all the scattered logic in different places, you can have it in a single place that you can deploy independently to all your services. Now, this is very popular. You can use tools like NPM packages, Maven artifacts, or whatever you're familiar with. Some of the key advantages of this pattern is your new services get compliance logic from day one, essentially, which is great, right? Like as you start to roll out new services, you don't need to implement from scratch. Your new services can immediately just get the compliance logic plugged in. You also eliminate discrepancies as there is more consistency across all your various services, and you have a single source of truth for critical logic. It's also really easy to implement. Right? It's one you can start with very easily, as all you need to do is extract your logic into a single component and then reuse it. Some of the trade-offs or things to watch out for are that this has less flexibility for very service-specific logic. So for example, if you have something specific for a particular service, you need to implement that outside of the library. Then it requires coordination for updates. You want to make sure all your services are on the same version of compliance, because if they're not, then you can also have discrepancies in compliance, which is not good. It also requires some level of consistency in the languages that you use. For example, if you have 15 different services and like 10 different languages, it happens, then you shouldn't be using this because you're losing a lot of the advantages. Like this particular pattern, I've seen it really reduce the time to expand businesses and grow teams, because you can essentially reuse the same logic in multiple services and not worry about re-implementing things from scratch. So when should you decide to use each pattern? Well, I have a simple decision framework that I use. One, use state machines when you have clear multi-step processes and each step has very defined compliance requirements. They're also very useful when you need an audit trail for how your customers are interacting with your system. You should use compliance libraries. They really shine when you have the same logic across multiple services and you want to have some consistency in the languages that you use, or you have some consistency in the languages that you use across services. Now, there are other patterns worth mentioning that deserve a shout out. So like rules engines, which are great for when you have rules that change frequently, maybe in fraud detection or risk assessment, or you can use event sourcing as well when you need a complete audit history. So for financial transactions, for example, it's really popular there, or for medical records. So we've only spoken in-depthly about two patterns today, but there are other patterns that you can use for other scenarios, things like access control, like data deletion, audit login, uptime guarantees, so on and so forth. Ensure you're choosing based on your specific challenge, right? There's no one-size-fits-all sort of solution. There is no one thing you can use for every single thing. It really matters what your business is doing, and having best what your business needs are, and having that deep understanding will help you choose what to use. You can also apply these patterns to imagine challenges, like some of you were in the talk earlier today. We're talking about model approval workflows for AIs, right? So state machines, for example, would be really good for that, because you can see clearly how the models were approved, when they were approved, and you can also have really strong gates for guarding those approvals. You can use things like compliance libraries for bias testing for the models as well. So yeah, you might need a combination of these patterns. You might need completely new ones. The key is to start simple, measure, and evolve based on your needs. So really important, compliance design patterns work technically, but success requires more than just the code, right? So there are key three things to making it work from my experience. The first, and I would say most important, is embed compliance experts in your engineering teams. They need to be design partners, not gatekeepers, not reviewers, not people you only involve at the very end. They should be involved from day one. This has consistently helped with delivering compliant systems and compliant products. Secondly, front-load your requirements analysis. This is really crucial. In this particular scenario, when you're dealing with like highly regulated systems, agile iterations don't actually work really well. You need to know, you need to have a deep understanding of what you're building before you start to build. The cost of getting it wrong is just too high, right? I know we are used to building fast breaking things, but that doesn't really work here because, again, if you're working in pharma, if you're working in healthcare, lives are on the line. So we need to be really, really considerate and careful. Third, you need to build rigorous testing infrastructure. Regression tests are a must, right? You don't want to lose your licenses over an incident. You don't want to be kind of scared of evolving your systems and scared of breaking things. So regression tests are a huge must to make sure that you're building with confidence. I'll just do a quick recap and some key takeaways from the talk. So if there are two things that I really want you to remember from this conversation is, first, compliance isn't something that you should validate after the fact. It is something that should shape your architecture from day one. It is something that you should be thinking about as you're doing requirements gathering. It's something you should be thinking about as you're doing discovery. It's not something you're just shoving at the very end. And secondly, you can turn compliance from a strength. You can turn it from a weakness to a competitive advantage and a strength for you and your business. While your competitors might be scrambling to retrofit compliance, you are building systems that scale with confidence. I'll just give you like quick next steps if you're curious about like where do I get started. The first thing is you can just go in tomorrow, audit one critical flow that you have and just ask yourself the question, am I compliant, right? Find out where you stand. This could be like user onboarding, payment processing, document generation. Hopefully I've given you some ideas. Just take a look at it and find out if you're compliant and if you're doing what you're meant to be doing. Find where second thing you can do is find where compliance logic is duplicated. So again, this is one quick win you can have. Find out where you might have discrepancies and inefficiency, and just at least figure that out, right? Then from there, you can pick just one pattern, implement it on your biggest pain point. Again, this could also be a quick win. You could pick like a library, just pull out your compliance logic, put in the library, and then at least you're making progress. And then most importantly, schedule coffee with your compliance team. You want to make them partners. You want to make them people that are involved with your teams. Similar to how you have your product owners, your product managers, your project managers, your design partners, and engineering all collaborating. You want to involve your compliance teams in the product building process sooner rather than later. Thank you very much. If you're facing any technical compliance challenges, let me know. I'd love to chat about them. Thank you.